Can I start by just acknowledging the Bunurong Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations on whose lands we meet, pay respects to their ancestors and elders and emerging leaders, and also acknowledge the other Indigenous people in the room, and welcome you all to come to the Faculty of Information Technology at Monash University, to the Indigenous Futures in IT, and starting to get people to think about the next generation of Indigenous entrepreneurs and leaders. IT is a big part of our lives, and it's actually probably been more part of your lives than mine. So I didn't grow up with that kind of technology, but here I am, and I just think it's a great opportunity for a vision for the future where our mob can really be. So I'm Chris Lawrence. I'm the Associate Dean Indigenous in the Faculty of Information Technology, and I'm also the Indigenous Associate Dean in Engineering. So I have a dual role, and so my role here is really around leadership and around embedding Indigenous knowledge systems in our curriculum, supporting our Indigenous students, making sure that you get access to all the services that are available to students here, and obviously being here to help guide you through your journey. I did my PhD, and that was a bit of a journey, but I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I can share when we do. I want to firstly open and welcome Professor Tristan Kennedy, who's our Deputy Vice Chancellor Indigenous at Monash University, who is going to say a few words and maybe talk a little bit about his own PhD journey. And just before I hand over the mic, bathrooms right down the back, unfortunately. So you just got to go all the way down and you'll see bathrooms down there. There's obviously there's tea and coffee, there's food. So just make sure you help yourself. Okay, Tristan.
Sorry, somebody's trying to call me while I'm here. All right, thanks, Chris. The question around technology or IT in our life history actually raised a funny story for me. I have a nearly 7-year-old daughter, and I was talking to her about phones and those sorts of things, and I said, do you know when I was your age and I wanted to speak to my friends on the phone, I had to go into the kitchen and use the rotary Bakelite phone on the wall that you couldn't leave the kitchen because it was attached to the wall. And my daughter sort of looked at me quizzically and she goes, so how did it take photographs? And I was like, no. Sorry, we had cameras that you put film into the back of, and you didn't close the back properly and it exposed all the film, and my mum was upset at me because it cost a fortune to get those things developed and that sort of thing. But we have come clearly a long way. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. Obviously, my name is Tristan Kennedy. I'm the DVC Indigenous at Monash here, and I too would like to acknowledge the Boomerang and really highlight how welcome the Boomerang people and the people of the Kulin Nations have made me feel incredibly welcome over the last 2 and a bit years that I've been at Monash. I'm a guest on this country like many of us. My background, much like Chris, is Balladong Noongar. From southwest Western Australia on my father's side. On my mother's side, I have Irish Australian ancestry, and my parents actually met, and I was born on Kaurna country in Adelaide. So I've spent most of my life living on Kaurna country, or what's now known as the Adelaide Plains. But I have travelled around quite a bit for work, and I'm going to tell a little bit of that story, I think. Starting with my journey to a PhD. I guess that's why we're here. We're talking about considering a PhD and going down that pathway. I used to think I had a fairly unique and kind of strange pathway towards a PhD and towards academia. And the more I kind of worked in academia, the more people I met, the more I realised that actually that it wasn't that abnormal. That actually pathways towards PhDs and working in academia are many and varied, and everyone comes up against various challenges. Uh, I I left school thinking I wanted to be an architect. I went to Adelaide University. I was lucky enough to have a pretty good ATAR to get me into architecture at Adelaide University, and I lasted a year before I realised I didn't see myself in a competitive working environment. I didn't expect that I'd be very good at tendering for architectural projects and things. And besides that, I remember being alongside a cohort of students who I absolutely felt like I didn't fit in with. And these other students in this architecture program at a group of 8 university were all already somehow connected to architecture. Their auntie or uncle was an architect. And so they had the ability to go and rely on the knowledge of their aunties and uncles or mums and dads or whatever to ask questions outside of the classroom. And I didn't have that. My family didn't have that knowledge. So I left university and some things happened in my family that were fairly kind of tragic and disruptive during that time. And so I didn't go back to uni for a couple of years. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I went back to university to do an arts degree because it was kind of, window shopping. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, except that I knew that I wanted to be at university. I studied sociology thinking it was social work, and actually really liked it when I realised it wasn't social work. I loved sociology. I dropped history out of my first year and focused on the sociology side of things. I became a school teacher. After that, I finished my BA and then got a graduate diploma in education in South Australia, and then realised I couldn't deal with being a school teacher. I actually really enjoyed being around the kids and teaching whatever I was teaching. I was a relief teacher, so sometimes I was teaching maths, other times PE or tech or whatever. But I didn't like the staff room. I didn't like being around the teachers who were there really disillusioned, watching the clock to retirement and speaking really poorly of the kids. The expectations just weren't there. And it's actually something that has inspired me in more recent times, like in the last couple of months, to look at some projects that we might try and lead from Monash to try and encourage teachers, to encourage particularly Indigenous students to aspire to achieve great things, because I think that's something that's missing in our schools. So anyway, back to uni I went, enrolled in an honours degree, and looked at the impact and the sort of sociological importance of men's lifestyle magazines, because again, we were still pre-social media. It was magazines that were doing the rounds. I got to spend a lot of time working with young people and asking them what they sort of thought of these magazines, the impact they had on their lives. They essentially said, I don't read them, but I know someone who does. Which clearly was a lie, but it's a good way of kind of, getting past the fact that you don't want to admit that you read these kind of pseudo-smutty kind of magazines that assume some identity, some masculine identity that none of us really actually adhere to. So I finished that, and then so going on to my PhD, I knew I wanted to look at gender. I knew I wanted to look at masculinity in my PhD. That was my area of sociology. And I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. And one of the best messages that my supervisor gave me, Professor Mary Holmes, who's now at Edinburgh University, was to pick something to study in your PhD that you love and that you will love in 3 or 4 years' time when you have to actually finish writing this thing up. And that was probably the best piece of advice I was given. I'm not a closet heavy metal fan. I'm a heavy metal fan. I've been a heavy metal fan since before I can remember, and heavy metal is really visibly ultra masculine. And I thought, what a great space to be looking to examine how masculinity works in this space. And this was about the time when social media was actually emerging, or Web 2.0, right? So we're looking at content created by the user as opposed to just simply going online and viewing stuff. So I did a PhD that looked at how masculinity kind of plays out in these online spaces, and I found that because of that kind of user-generated content, these tropes, these ideas of masculinity or ultra masculinity, were posted up on forums and Facebook pages and that sort of thing, or pre-Facebook pages, and so these ideas of masculinity took on this really permanent and highly visible nature. And so someone could write something really horrible, right, and post it up on these forums, and they could leave the forum, but the comment would still be there for the next person to come in, and it sort of signposted this acceptable idea of what it is to be masculine in this space. And that work has kind of evolved in my research to how we as Indigenous communities and Indigenous people encounter racism and harmful and hate speech and that sort of thing. The fact that, you know, if somebody utters something, you know, entirely racist and horrible in this room today, and then we all go home, someone will come into this room again tomorrow and they won't hear that racist comment. It doesn't hang around in the air. But if we utter that kind of stuff on a Facebook page or on Twitter or in some sort of social media platform and then leave that platform, it stays there for the next person. And so I think that there's a really interesting thing happening with misinformation and disinformation, and particularly now turning our attention to AI. But look, getting away from my research and going back to the experience of the PhD, I had a wonderful supervisor, like I said, in Professor Mary Holmes, who went to Edinburgh University and said, look, if you can afford to get yourself to Scotland, I'd love to take you with me, but I couldn't. And so I ended up, in hindsight, I should have put a little bit more thought and effort into the next phase, but essentially the university didn't have a very big sociology department, and the department turned to the next best fit in terms of a supervisor for me. And we, you know, there was no real animosity or anything between us. We just didn't really gel. And so I kind of drifted a bit, or coasted, during that part of my PhD. And then that supervisor actually left, got a job in, I don't know what I don't think I said anything wrong to these supervisors, but they all tend to get jobs elsewhere and internationally. But that next supervisor got a job in New Zealand. And so I was sort of stuck again. But at the same time, I'd been working at Yungarendi, which was the First Nations Centre for Higher Education and Research at the time, had various sort of names and that sort of, I can't remember what the name is now, but that was essentially what we call the William Cooper Institute, but at Flinders University. And I was working as an academic, as a level A academic, while I was doing my PhD. And so that, while I was coasting with a supervisor who wasn't really interested, I was still engaged in academia, and so I had a space on campus to work. And that would be one of the really great pieces of advice that I'd like to give you, is to, you know, sure, obviously engage with your supervisor, don't drift from your supervisor, but being on site, being in a space that is about your research, that is about engaging with colleagues, that is about being around like-minded people, even if you're not constantly talking and engaging with them, just being around them is a really important way of feeling like this is where you belong, this is the work that you're doing, and it's your work. It's not just something you do in the evenings and that sort of thing. And so being at Yungarendi, being you know, in an office next door to two or three other academics at various stages of their career really gave me a sense of belonging and gave me the motivation to keep going. Unfortunately, that job, I actually thought at the time it was meant to be an ongoing position, and I was informed right at the last minute that it wasn't. There was a restructure happening at the university, which happened from time to time. And I ended up, very luckily, getting a phone call from Professor Bronwyn Carlson, who's the head of Indigenous Studies at Macquarie University, asking me to come up to Sydney to have a yarn, really. And I didn't realise it was a job interview, but it was. and I ended up applying and getting a position there right at the end of my PhD. So I was probably only about 6 months out. Started working as a level B academic at Macquarie University. And I was very lucky that I was able to very easily negotiate the research component of my balanced academic role as completing my PhD, and I had a slightly reduced teaching load as well, and so I was really able to hit that last 6 months of the PhD candidature, which is really, in my mind, the really important part. You've done all the groundwork, you've done all the data collection, you've been thinking about this, you know it, it's pouring out of your ears. You need to write this, you need to polish this PhD into something that is ready for submission. Although someone once did say to me, a PhD is never completed, it's simply abandoned in a passable state. Which is also a nice little thing to keep in the back of your mind when the pressure seems to be getting too much, right? Like, speak to your supervisor. Any good supervisor worth their salt will not allow you to submit a PhD that they don't honestly believe will pass. So trust your supervisor, trust your associate supervisor, reach out to critical friends. But yes, it won't be the world's best piece of work. It'll be the best piece of work that you are doing at that stage, and then your career will build on that. But yeah, look, I in that last 6 months, I had a wonderful supervisor in Professor Tara Brabazon at Flinders University. She's now at Charles Darwin University as the Dean of Graduate Research. She has a YouTube channel. I would encourage you to go and have a look. She has a YouTube and Facebook and Twitter channel and all these sorts of channels where she vlogs about doing a PhD and about the challenges of doing a PhD. Every Thursday she releases another one, and it's gone on for, I don't know, 5-6 years now. She is a machine. So I had a really great supervisor, but I also at the time realized the key to not only success in my PhD, but success in my career. And that was surrounding myself with the right people. Avoiding people who weren't going to really offer anything to the group that you were part of. This isn't really about an individual thing, this is about the group. I was at Macquarie University with Professor Bronwyn Carlson, and we went and hand-picked people. We attracted people to the department to come and take on positions as we were growing the department, because we went and met them and we realized they were go-getters. They were enthusiastic people. We wanted to be around them. We encouraged people to think outside the box, to play to their strengths, and that rubbed off on me, and therefore it rubbed off on them. And we ended up as a team really achieving a lot. And that's something that I still put at the forefront of my leadership here at Monash, and that is making sure that my team and that myself are around the right people, and that we can have those conversations where people can play to their strengths. And it actually, the first time I realised, and maybe I'll finish on this, but the first time I realised that was a good way of doing things was I was chatting with a guy called Stefan Mahuto, I think his name was. He was from Flinders University. He was from the National Institute of Labour Studies. And he had done his PhD in France with a group of 4 or 5 colleagues who were all doing their PhD. And very early on in their PhD, let's say 4 of them had the conversation and said, let's share stuff. Let's set up an arrangement where if we find readings, resources, events, opportunities, we share them with each other. And we share them openly, back and forth. And 4 of them said, yeah, that sounds like a wonderful idea. One of them wanted to go it alone. They didn't want to share things. They thought they were doing the hard work to go and do the research, to go and find the articles, find the books, to read the books. Why would they possibly share all their hard work with all these other people? That was the only person who didn't pass their PhD out of that group. The people who shared the resources, who worked together and collaborated, all passed their PhD. And so that's what I've seen in my career, is that when we get together, when we share our resources, our knowledges, it's a lot more fun for starters, but we all tend to be much more successful. So I guess I don't know actually whether people were specifically invited to this group or signed up to come to this group to listen and to learn and collaborate and communicate. But what an amazing step towards a PhD journey and PhD completion, by actually coming to these types of events and listening to people, talking to people, asking questions, and walking out of the room motivated to take that next step and motivated to go and do that research at the library and that sort of thing. So look, I'm actually looking forward to putting down the microphone and listening to what everyone else has to say for the rest of this session. I don't know if there's opportunities for questions, but maybe at the end we can do that. Yeah. All right. Well, look, thanks very much for asking me to come and speak here today. I didn't talk much about the role at Monash, but I don't think that's important. We can talk about that later if we need to. And look, all the best for everyone embarking upon this really exciting and fun journey. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And thanks for sharing your journey, a snippet of it all, because it just goes so quickly. You know, I took 5 years to do my PhD because I had 5 years of funding. So I used every cent, and much to the disbelief of one of my supervisors. So having said that, are you, you're coming up next? Yeah. So I'm going to introduce Professor Guido Tack, whose name not on here, but anyway, Guido is our graduate, Associate Dean, Graduate Research. So I'll let him tell his role and story, what he's here for.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I also want to start by acknowledging, thank you. Also want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people. For me, so I've been in Australia for about 13 years now. I'm from Germany originally. And I've actually just got Australian citizenship this year. So that was an interesting step for me. It's you know, kind of changing your identity a bit. It made me reflect quite a lot about what that actually means and so on. And I've been fascinated with the history of this country since I got here, because it's absolutely unique in the world, especially when you come in from the outside. It's something that I wasn't aware of at all before I came here. So I really appreciate the history, the depth of history that's around here, and find it really important that we support that and kind of put a lot of emphasis on that in our faculty. And I think our faculty is really trying to work in that area a lot. Chris obviously has a massive impact on that since he started with us. And I hope that from my portfolio, we can support that as well. So as Chris said, my role is Associate in Graduate Research. So that means that I'm responsible for all of the PhD students and Masters by Research students in the faculty. A lot of that is from an administrative point of view, so signing lots of approvals and those sort of things. But luckily, some of it is also strategy. So really trying to decide where the faculty wants to go, where we invest, where we, how we support our PhD students, those sorts of topics. And that's obviously the much more interesting part of my role. So I've got a few slides about the boring but important parts, like how do you actually get into the program, what does it mean to do a PhD and so on. But I think I'd like to start by just describing a bit what the faculty is like, right? The size of the faculty, the different groups we have, the types of research that we're doing. So it's the only faculty of information technology in Australia. In most other universities, IT is part of engineering typically, or other faculties. And I think that really gives us a unique advantage, because the kind of breadth of research in our faculty is absolutely unique. Right? We do things that everybody else is doing. We do them really well, like, I don't know, hardcore AI research or cryptography, those sorts of topics, right? The really core computer sciencey topics. But we also do a lot of research on things that wouldn't really fit into an engineering faculty, for example, right? Things like, how do computers affect society? How do humans interact with computers? All those sorts of topics that are extremely important, and where putting people together that have that kind of background with people who have the technology background is really, really valuable. And so that's where I think a lot of the interesting research comes from in our faculty. So we have 3 departments. We have a department of data science and AI, a department of human-centered computing, and a department of software systems and cybersecurity. We have around, I think, 200 academic staff in the faculty. So I think around 120 or so of them are like the typical teaching and research academics. So what you would think of like associate professors, professors, lecturers, those sorts of roles. The others are research fellows, so who are doing pure research maybe for a few years, and roles like that. It's spread out over all those topics, right? So we have, I don't know, about half of the, about a third of the people in, a bit more than a third in Department of Data Science and AI. I think the cybersecurity department is a bit smaller. Human-centered computing is roughly the same size as data science and AI. We have a lot of undergraduate and coursework students. I think we're somewhere in the 7,000 or 8,000 or so students that we teach in the faculty. And we have around 400 graduate research students, PhD and masters by research. Not all of them here at Clayton, but we also have a campus in Malaysia. So we have, I think, around 60 PhD students over in Malaysia. We have a few students starting right now in Indonesia. There's a new campus over there. We have a few students in China, in Suzhou, where there's a research institute that's aligned, or that I think it is a Monash Research Institute, but in collaboration with a university over there. So yeah, we have this international network, but the majority of people is actually here at Clayton. And as a PhD student, you're part of one of those departments, you're part of a particular research group in a department, and usually closely aligned with your main supervisor as a PhD student. So I just want to go through a few kind of steps that you would typically go through if you want to do a PhD. Like, how do you actually get started? The main thing is you need to find a supervisor and a project. That's the first step, because even before you get started, your supervisor will guide you through that application process, right? So there's kind of a bit of matchmaking necessary at the start, right? So we have to know that you're interested, and then we have to find people who might be interested in supervising you. We have a few mechanisms for that. I think I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So the supervisor will guide you through what we call an expression of interest process. That's basically a bit of paperwork that you have to do. And then the faculty sends you an invitation to apply. That's a bit more official and also a bit of paperwork. And then you apply, you get enrolled, and you start your PhD. It's, especially for domestic PhD students, it is really almost as straightforward as that. So there's not a lot of hurdles. For international students, there's obviously a lot more to be done around visas and those sort of things. For domestic students, it's fairly easy. I want to talk a little bit about prerequisites, and this is not to kind of scare you off if this doesn't meet exactly what your current CV looks like. But I think it's important to understand that there is a process in terms of how to get into the degree. So roughly what you have to do is you have to demonstrate research readiness, right? So you have to demonstrate that your education and experience so far means that you're ready to now complete a research degree. And there's different ways to demonstrate that. The normal way to demonstrate that for most of our students is by completing a master's or an honors degree, right? So that's the typical way to get into the PhD. But you could also demonstrate that, for example, through relevant work experience of 5 years or so, right? Relevant means in the area that you want to research on and with some kind of researchy role in the work that you've done. You may have published outputs. This could be white papers or academic papers or something like that. You may have artistic outputs. So for example, we have a lab in Caulfield called Sensi Lab, where a lot of people are doing artistic work. And they, for example, do research on musical instruments or on other kind of artistic projects. And so in those sorts of cases, if you're an artist and you have artistic output, that can be part of your application, right? So what I want to share here really is that there's a range of pathways into the PhD. And if you're not sure whether your CV matches that exactly, talk to us and we can figure that out. And if it doesn't fit at the moment, we can also talk to you about, okay, what can you do over the next 6 months, over the next 12 months to get to the point where you are research ready and we can get you into the PhD degree, right? So I think that's my main message from this slide. If you've got an honors degree, tick, that's fine. Just apply and enroll. If you don't quite fit into these degrees or these categories, talk to us and we can figure something out and get you to the point where you can apply and enroll. Scholarships and funding. This is obviously important. A PhD is a 3.5-year degree at a minimum. Most of our students take a little bit longer than that, between 3.5 and 4 years. And we all know cost of living is a problem. So you have to somehow support yourself during that time. PhD stipends for Indigenous applicants are reasonably generous at Monash at 53,000. That's tax-free. So it's a scholarship that's available. And I think that's a really great support from the university for this portfolio. There's additional financial support available once you get into the degree. So for example, if you need funding for conference travel or for funding some aspects of your research, you need some, I don't know, you need to buy books, you need to fund some user studies that you want to do, those sort of things. There's funding available from the faculty in that case. And we also offer teaching opportunities. I think this is actually really, this has changed quite a lot over the last couple of years. So if you're interested in an academic career after your PhD, it's actually a really good idea to build up your portfolio by doing some teaching during your PhD, right? Because then that's part of your CV. You've got some formal evaluations of your teaching, and you can put that on your CV once you finish. And we can now offer PhD students contracts that last for the entirety of their PhD. So like a 3.5-year or 3-year contract, where you've got a guaranteed amount of teaching every year, which is roughly equivalent to currently $16,000 a year in additional salary on top of the stipend. So I think it's a good opportunity. It's not for everybody, like not everybody wants to teach or wants to go into an academic career afterwards. That's perfectly fine. But if that's an option for you, I think this is just, I mean, if you add up those two numbers, we're getting to a point where if you consider that all of that is tax-free, that's a proper salary altogether, right? So I think that makes it a lot more attractive than it was just a few years ago, which is great. All right, timeline, I just already mentioned. A typical PhD is 3.5 years plus a little bit, probably. So the typical timeline is that in the first year, you define your research project. You really figure out what it is actually that you're looking at. Because at the start of your PhD, you will have a rough idea, but you won't have exactly the research questions nailed down that you want to work on. And so you define your research project, you do some literature review, to figure out what everybody else has done in that area. You may have some first steps towards results, depending on the area that you work in. And all of that is typically very collaborative in our faculty, right? We have very few PhD students who just, sit in their room and do their PhD on their own and then just occasionally meet with the supervisors. A lot of the projects that we offer are very collaborative. So you meet with your supervisors often, meet with other PhD students that work in the same area of research and so on. And then at the end of the first year, we have a formal milestone where you give a seminar talk, you get feedback from a panel of experts, and you basically, we call it confirmation of candidature, because that's a real milestone where the university wants to make sure that you're ready to complete your PhD. Right, to go on with your PhD, and we can be fairly certain that you will have a good outcome in the end. So year 2, you conduct your core research. You're well on top of the literature now. You know what you want to do. You really go deep into your research. You do some ongoing professional development. We have a professional development program that runs in parallel with your PhD. You work probably on your first publication, and all of this is like a typical PhD, right? It doesn't have to be exactly like that. But many students would work towards a publication maybe by the end of year 1 or in year 2. You may have some conference travel. If you get a paper accepted at a conference, you interact with the wider research community, those sort of things. Try to build up a little bit of a profile for yourself as well. And then again, there's a milestone at the end of year 2, which is called the progress review, where again, like an expert panel kind of checks in with you. You give a presentation, they give you feedback, and we just make sure that you're on track. Year 3, you finalize your research project. By that time, you should be the expert. You should be telling your supervisors basically how stuff works, right? So you're very deep into your research. You do maybe produce some additional publications, maybe go to more conferences. We have an internship program, so especially for people who want to work closely with industries or other outside organizations, you can do an internship for maybe a couple of months. And then towards the end, you start planning your write-up, right, to actually turn all of your results from 3 years into a thesis. So end of year 3, again, a milestone, so the final review milestone, where we just want to make sure that you're ready to write up, give you some final feedback, maybe finalize all of your experiments if you're doing something experimental, some tips for how to write up your thesis and so on. And then in year 4, you've got between, let's say, 6 to 9 months or so left. Finalize your thesis, submit, celebrate, right? So that's kind of how, how the typical PhD would look like. Now, all of this is kind of negotiable, right? So some students take a little bit longer than 3.5 years. Some students need to go part-time during their PhD. Some students need to take a break for whatever reasons. So there is a lot of flexibility built into the system. And again, the important thing is that if you have this strong relationship with your supervisors, a bit like what Tristan also mentioned earlier, they are the ones who not just supervise you, but who give you advice during your entire PhD, right? Who help you navigate all of that and hopefully give you advice on how to get to that final submission and celebration point. So we have a lot of support structures here that help you get to that point, right? So you're not on your own and just kind of working for 3.5 years and then hopefully have some kind of document of 100 pages that is good enough, right? That's really not how it works. So typically you have weekly or bi-weekly meetings with your supervisors. You have an active research group around you, other PhD students, other research fellows, other academics who work in a similar area. And I think it depends a bit on kind of the research culture in the group that you're joining. But it's important as a student to contribute to that research culture, right? To be an active part of the research group. As I mentioned earlier, we have professional development and training. We're in the process of kind of remodeling all of that. So from next year, it'll look a bit more, I think spiffy is the word that our academic director always uses. So that's, I think, going to be even better than what we have at the moment. We have dedicated academic and admin staff to answer your questions. So we have Amy in the room today. So she's from our graduate research professional staff team. And together with 3, 4 other colleagues, they support the PhD students in the faculty. And it's like every student will tell you that they're fantastic, and the support that you get from them as a student is really, really valuable. We have a dedicated academic, what's exact title? Academic language support person. So she is providing basically workshops and one-on-one sessions on academic writing, professional communication, how to, design a poster for your conference and those sort of things, right? So she also helps you with report writing for the milestones, with feedback on chapters of your thesis, those sort of things. So that's another thing that's specifically in our faculty, which actually not every faculty offers. I already talked about the annual milestones to get feedback from an independent panel. Of course, We have all of the wider Monash support services available. We have the medical services on campus. We have mental health support, so counseling services on campus. And we have the Monash Graduate Association as an independent organization who looks after PhD students as well. And they're doing a fantastic job with that as well. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to share. So really the main message is there is a little bit of paperwork. Monash is a big institution. There's always a lot of bureaucracy involved in everything. But we have very good people here who can guide you through that process, right? So the main thing is don't just look at the website and kind of be scared and intimidated, but actually talk to people, right? Everyone here is extremely happy to have a chat about how to get into the degree, to look at your current CV, your transcripts, to get you in touch with potential supervisors, and then to actually guide you through that process. And I think that's all I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Guido. Appreciate that. Just in the interest of time, we'll keep moving on because I know you want to ask questions. So I'm going to introduce, we've got a panel right here. You can see the names and faces and we've got Leslie Nelson, who's actually on the Zoom. Leslie's a currently enrolled PhD student here. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. That way, and their bios are also here, but not everybody's got one of these, I think. So, but can I invite, so Leslie's online, can I invite Dr. Narissa Timbry to come up? So we're going to sit down here. And Associate Professor Joanne Evans. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves first. So maybe, Leslie, we start with you online. So that way you can, I think you've got a few minutes to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris. So my name is Leslie Nelson. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of the panel today. I'm a Baladong Wajak Noongar Yoga from the Noongar Nation in the southwest of Western Australia, and just want to pay my respects to the traditional custodians on the land that this event is being held, but also on the lands from across many nations in Australia. So thank you. I'm currently a CEO for an Aboriginal medical service in the southwest, but I also have undertaken some study throughout my journey in life, and currently in my second year of a PhD, studying at Monash and looking at the phenomenon of digital transformation and looking at it through a cultural lens for how we undertake the work within the Indigenous Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to be part of today's event and listen and share my journey.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm going to ask Dr. Narissa Timbry to introduce herself.
Hi everyone. I don't like microphones unless it's karaoke, but anyways, my name's Narissa Timbry and my family are from the Yuin Nation on the New South Wales South Coast, but I'm very fortunate to be working here on the down in Melbourne. We've just relocated from Canberra, and I too pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and yeah, feel very fortunate to be at Monash Uni and to be here today. And I guess my background's archive, so I'm an archivist, but now in the Faculty of IT. So I'll pass on to Joanne.
Thanks, Narissa. Hello, I'm Joanne Evans, and I've been around Monash a while now. I actually did my PhD here back in 2003 was when I started. So that can be a good thing to have been around and seen all sorts of variations in the administration and other processes. But yes, it can also be a bad thing when you remember how things were and when they come around again. My research, like Narissa, I came to my PhD as an archivist, and I was really interested in in exploring conceptually the role of records and record keeping in people's lives. And the PhD was a wonderful opportunity to sort of open up avenues to explore that. And my research has evolved into looking at the record keeping associated with children in out-of-home care. And we know how much that impacts on Indigenous communities, and to try and do something about making sure that the systems that are there to care for children and young people and families actually do achieve those outcomes. And so it's being in a faculty of IT is an opportunity to not just look at what is, but actually think about how digital technologies might play a part in making a better future. So that's a big motivator for my research at the moment. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Joanne. That's actually one of our questions, Leila. I've got some questions, but I think I'm going to play it by ear as well, and just kind of be organic about it. I guess, for me, when I started my PhD, I didn't actually want to do a PhD. I just finished my master's, a 2-year intense program in epidemiology, master's in epidemiology at ANU, and Leslie knows that she did the MA too. I encouraged her to go and do that, and she did. And epidemiology is like the study of infectious communicable diseases. And so after doing that for 2 years, I was kind of like, I had enough. And because it was intense, it was all course blocked out, and we had like 8 projects to do that we had to meet, and that was all our chapters as well. And then you have your bookends that you had to write up the conclusion and recommendations and all those lessons learned. So yeah, they kind of contacted me, said, "Oh, that's great, congratulations on finishing your master's. Now, can you come and do a PhD with us?" And I said no. And but the supervisor, who's up now one of my best friends, Aboriginal doctors, Professor Sandra Eads, pursued me and said, "Look, we'll put your name on this grant anyway." She said, "If we get the grant, then you can do your PhD." It was her first grant, and she got it. It was about building capacity for Indigenous academics, I guess, HCRs and PhDs, masters. And so I had a full funding for 5 years. There's a couple of us had that full funding, where others just needed a little bit of a top up or a bit of hand to get through. And so it was a bit of a consortium of universities that came together, and we did that. So Sandra was one of the first ones to get that through the National Health and Medical Research Council. And so that 5 years took me all over the world. And gave me such a opportunity that I never had. And then I was having so much fun for 4 years. And then in the last year, they said, "You got 1 year left and your funding's out." And so I put my skates on and I wrote my PhD in 1 year. Well, when I say that, I brought it all together in 1 year, but I had to write. And Tristan's right about sharing a room with other like-minded people. It's important. And I did that. So that was great. So I wanted to ask, I guess maybe I'll start with Leslie online, just because she's online. Leslie, why did you pursue, why pursue a master's or a PhD? You're on mute.
Thank you, Chris, for that question. One of the things, I suppose, for me, academia was never a pathway that I had ever wanted to explore. And so I started studies later in life. And through that process, my first opportunity to get study was at the University of South Australia in Adelaide. And it was an opportunity where I could look at studying management through an Indigenous perspective. And that sort of gave me my first insight into academia. And then that 2 years into that, my father had passed away, and many of the life challenges, I suppose, for me, took me in my journey in academia. And I think through scholarships, through the opportunities to complete a commerce degree, an MBA, and a Masters of Applied Epidemiology, I went down those pathways because life threw many challenges to me. So it was to look at how would I survive? How would I put food on the table? And I suppose studying gave me that opportunity to have the flexibility. But it also started to provide insight and literature and a greater understanding of areas where I was keen to continue my pathway, and that was down that pathway of management and understanding what our own cultural aspects and the external environments that can shift for us in understanding the way we do things in Indigenous cultures through managing organisations. And that took me to a role in becoming a CEO, but just the fascination, being able to understand that, yes, you can achieve these opportunities and you can succeed in academia because it was very early in my school life at school that, some teachers would say, well, you're not going to achieve much in your life. And you don't really understand some of that until you get into university and understand there's a whole new world there that we haven't been exposed to. And we didn't grow up in environments where we sat down and talked about academia. And going on to do PhDs was something that I never ever imagined that I would be doing or would have the capability to do. And so for me to get through my first year of my doctorate of business administration at UTS, it was a great overwhelming sense that I had the ability to do this. And one of the things I learned around understanding supervisors, I ended up with no supervisors at UTS, so I had to pursue that journey and move forward into another academic institution. And so very courageous when you look back at the steps taken, because we were guided by fellow colleagues who had navigated this journey, and Chris played a key part in many aspects of that as well. But I think for myself, there was never the thought of this is what I'm going to go and study and this is what I'm going to do. It was always, thinking of, well, what's next? What's going to happen? And I'm just very grateful that I'm in a position to be able to, study. There are some places I want to go and see and look at through this research that I'm currently doing, because for us around digital transformation, understanding how the impact is through embedding it into the fabric of an organisation that you manage and operate to all aspects of that fabric of that organisation. How is that change in digital transformation deployed? And, we face new laws and new regulations, and what are the acceptable social norms, and the ethical practices that are happening in Aboriginal organisations around technology. And if we don't pursue that and start to build the literature in that space, we will be once again left behind as Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations.
Thank you, Leslie. Really appreciate that, your journey and why you're doing it and pursuing your PhD. I might ask Narissa why pursue a master's or a PhD?
Okay. So I, when I finished my Bachelor of Education in PE, I got asked to do a job which was a small library resource collection, and I had zero skills. And I actually probably did a really bad job at it, because I would catalogue resources the way like community would ask for things. So unless you had a knowledge of the families and the mobs and everyone on the South Coast, you're not going to be able to retrieve it. So anyways, you live and you learn. So I did that, and then we had to move away because my husband's work. And when I was getting rid of all my kind of work emails, I saw a scholarship from Monash Uni to do a Masters of Information Management and Systems. And I thought, wow, I can actually learn, because a lot of community would come to me asking me how do I find my family, what records have you got on my mob, and I had no idea. So I'd send them all to Kirsten Thorpe up at the State Library of New South Wales. And so I thought, oh, this is a good way to learn, you know, how to research and find archives and stuff. And that came out of a recommendation from the Bring Them Home report. So from that day on, I did the Masters. I was like, well, that's where I want my work to be, doing stuff that makes things easier to access records for members of the stolen generations, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, because we have so much stuff from our families in institutions that it was about connecting. And I finished, and Joanne will know this, I had zero interest in research, zero interest in a PhD like Chris. I just wasn't interested, and my supervisors and teachers and mentors were going, you need to do a PhD. So anyway, I absolutely refused, and that was only because I'd seen bad research with my own family, and I was like, I was too ashamed in a sense to say I'm a researcher now, because it wasn't such a good thing to say. But then I saw a scholarship that came across my desk, and I thought, you know, I've been lucky to get these skills that I have. I need to share them. And then a research project came out of a project that Tom was working on, and I thought, oh, I've got the skills that can actually contribute to that. Research that was already happening at Monash, which was really good, and that's what led me on the journey of doing a PhD. But in saying that, what I thought I was doing and what I eventually did were two very different things. But I learned that that's okay, and that's part of the research project. So I hadn't failed like I thought I did multiple times. Had a big whinge and cry about it. But yeah, it was about just and listening to my family support me and the mentors and the people around me. And now I encourage everyone to do research, even because I had self-doubts, oh, you're not smart enough, you can't do it. But we need those voices, and particularly in archives and record keeping, there's not a lot of us there. So just if you've been lucky enough to develop those skills, then to share it around, I guess.
That's your pitch. Joanne.
Yeah. Yes. I guess, yes, you doing research, it's just, why wouldn't you want to is the question for those of us who have sort of been bitten by that bug. And it's the opportunity to explore something deeply that you're passionate about, or that in some cases you might grow to be passionate about as well too, as you find out what it is that you really need to explore. So it is curious about, why things are the way they are and what you might want to do differently about them. So it's it is exploring the unknown. I know I've had conversations with students sort of doing a master's thesis and sort of saying we're going from coursework where there's an answer to actually playing around with something where there might not be any easy answers. So I guess to be comfortable with that kind of ambiguity and that kind of complexity to be able to explore something. And I think an important point that Narissa made there was also it's the opportunity to also think about the way that we do research, to actually think about the methods and the approaches, and to making sure that they actually achieve the ends that they need to achieve as well too. So some research the outcome that can come of it is actually new ways of doing research, and that's certainly been my experience as we've sort of moved from, I guess, very traditional qualitative research methods to now much more participatory and community-based methods, and that's been because of having people like Narissa coming into the academy and opening up everyone's eyes to different ways of exploring things and different ways of making sure that the people and the communities that are involved in research are appropriately respected and taken care of. So that's another area in which you can make a research difference. And I guess picking up on what Tristan, I think Leslie and everybody and you, Chris, have talked about, it opens up opportunities. And it's not necessarily doors. Sometimes it can be windows and nooks and crannies and all sorts of things like that. I think it's quite interesting to think about all the journeys as sort of have evolved. And so it really is a basis on which you can, you have this deep understanding of something, you have a deep understanding of yourself in going through those processes, and that sets you in good stead for sort of making a future in all sorts of different kinds of places.
Yeah. And I think, look, from my perspective too, I think that you do a PhD or master's or PhD by research because you're passionate about the topic. You got to be, otherwise there's no point in you doing it, because you're not it's not driving you. You've got to have a drive of the purpose of why you're doing it, and always remind yourself. And I think for me, going to do my master's in epidemiology, that was driven by personal, but also professional stuff. I was working for the AIDS Council of New South Wales in Sydney, and I was their first Aboriginal education person, delivering workshops and developing campaigns around HIV and AIDS for Indigenous communities throughout New South Wales back in the 90s. And so it opened up a lot of issues and obviously a lot of challenges, but also got me thinking about things, and then it impacted on my family. And my brother died from HIV and AIDS. So that was also another motivator for me to pursue that research, because I was angry, but I was also determined to understand, well, how come Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are not included in the HIV/AIDS epidemiology data collections? And they didn't ask those questions back during the AIDS epidemic. So it was all post that. So we came in. I was one of the second Aboriginal people to work for the National Centre in HIV/AIDS epidemiology and do my research there. And so my research led to, $1 million research funding between Australia, Canada and New Zealand to look at Indigenous HIV/AIDS surveillance systems and understand the patterns and trends and prevalence. That's all epi talk, but but for me, that drove me then to my PhD. So even though I didn't want to do it, but when you're giving 5 years of funding to go and do it, so I thought, okay. And I think, Leslie talked about putting food on the table. And that for me was like, I guess I had these ambitious dreams. I'm going to have this big job when I finish my master's and I don't have to worry about that. But no, that's not true. Kind of, it's a wake-up call. It's also you grow up doing that. And I think, your passion, all of you, I guess, about what's been driving, motivating you. But also, I think it's, you've got to be what you want to do. So you don't have to try and solve all the world's problems or all the Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander problems. You don't have to do that. You can do a master's or a PhD in AI if you want, and focus on whatever you want to focus on. If you want to be a techie, that's what you do. You still have to have a research question. You still have to understand why you're doing that research, and work out, your project and plan, as Guido mentioned before. So, but I think having a passion really does drive you. You know what you want because it makes you determined. And so I have a couple more questions. I guess because it's information technology, right? So we're going to stick to that theme. And I guess how can information technology support areas such as health, well-being, climate change, the environment, or business? Because they're the sort of things that obviously IT is playing a big role now, and even more so since COVID. So it's really impacted on all our lives. And digital health was one of those things. So I guess maybe I'll start with Narissa this time. Because you talked about archives and you talked about your purpose why you did your masters initially.
Yeah, well, part of knowing who you are and where you come from is your connections and your health, and it's all kind of related. Knowing that, and not everyone has that luxury to know that type of stuff. But I guess for me, like our people of our technologies and ways of sharing story and transmitting knowledge of thousands upon thousands of years old. But in terms of new technologies, if communities like, for example, the research I did in my PhD was using the Monash Country Lines Archive, or Wunungu Arawa, it's called now, project, which was 3D visualizations of people's stories and dreaming. So through that research, it was a way of the older generations connecting with the younger generations through a medium that spoke to them, you know. So, and from that, those technologies, so Tom was on that project, and when the people who developed the animations would watch them with the younger generations, it would bring up memories, bring up stories. So it was a way of capturing something that spoke to the young generation, but also the old generation could talk to that, and from that stories came. And so yeah, that those types of technologies, if they, you know, if that's what the younger ones want or anyone wants, then that can facilitate that. But importantly, and the reason I'm so passionate about research now, is that we need to do that without causing further harm, because the analogue ways in terms of records, record keeping archives, hasn't got a hugely great track record. So through research and through working with communities and peoples, we can make sure technologies don't replicate some of the things that didn't go so well. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe Leslie, the question was about, I don't know if you remember the question, but it was really just about how can you use technology to support areas such as health and well-being and climate change, environmental business.
Oh, thank you, Chris. So, you know, for myself and the study that I'm doing in my research is focusing on areas where, firstly, we want to ensure that we can start to build that the literature around this space. But it's also what we've seen is that, you know, COVID. When we're talking about the broader digital health transformation of healthcare, it has moved very slowly, but COVID came along and it became the catalyst for the rapid change of the government and the policy positions and the use of telehealth to our communities. Everybody has been affected in some way, but what we saw happen is that today there's certainly clear evidence right through our communities that supports the increase of uptake of technology by our Aboriginal communities and Torres Strait Islander communities. And we're seeing that many of our people are engaging with a range of digital devices, but their expectations is always to be connected to services and organisations and to conduct in many aspects of the various activities that they do in their life. And even to our elders, we're seeing this uptake and that reliance now on technology of how we deliver services from a management and operational perspective has to be seen from a business perspective and has to be seen from that holistic journey before technology even comes into the conversation. Because if we want to embark in this space around digital transformation, that consideration has to come from our own understanding of our culture and the frameworks that ensures that our people will continue to engage in a culturally safe way for ourselves. And this is work. It's not just changing formats or documents. It's when we're looking at that overall digital transformation, it's around an overall transformation in mindsets, in the way we deliver services, what systems we embed in our organisations, how do we provide education, how is it culturally safe, how do we ensure that right value creation of activities, of the purpose and our strategies are all connected up. And so that's the challenge, and what will be the fundamental changes that need to be made, and that's going to go beyond something that we've never seen before.
Yeah, thank you. Joanne?
I guess picking up on what Leslie was saying there, it really is about making sure that people are at the heart of technology. I think we've gone, in my lifetime from, computers being, something. I remember we got a Commodore 64 computer when I was in my last years at high school. So a world where it didn't touch our lives. It was something that computer scientists studied, to now being something that is every day, that's ubiquitous. And so I think there needs to be a shift within the IT disciplines to understand how they need to put people ahead of the technology in order to address those big questions. Because I guess, and as Narissa said, technology can be something, can actually help in addressing issues and problems, but it can all too easily be weaponized as well too. And so that's why it's for me, it's just so important that we have people doing IT research that is really focused on making sure that people are the heart of research, and a diversity of people are at the heart of research. Because one thing we know about technology is it can be very normative, and that's when it can cause the most damage to people who don't fit within its parameters. And so I think for me, that's the solution to those things are going to be through harnessing.
Leslie, I think it's your...
Yeah. Oh, the power.
Oh.
Oh, that's better. I think we're okay now.
Right, we're okay.
Yes, yeah. Harnessing the power of the technology by making sure that, yes, people are always the ones that are in the control of it.
Well, yeah, and our motto here in FIT is IT for social good. That's basically what our main purpose is in the faculty doing research. That it's got to be about social good. It's got to be there to help improve communities and people's lives, as opposed to harnessing technology for harm or any other purpose. And it's challenging times, right? This is where we are now, and I think that's kind of also where I led me to my in doing my PhD. After I finished my PhD was actually in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and wellbeing, like looking at influences on people's decision making, what was driving their decisions to do things that they did, in terms of making nutrition and exercise and activities, and I moved away from the HIV/AIDS, but I kind of had a chapter around that because sexual health and behaviours was all part of our lives. So it's normal for us as human beings. And so that was also true for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I wanted to include an aspect of that in their decision making. And so then it led to me thinking about my future after I finished. And I ended up applying for an Australian Research Council grant, Indigenous Discovery, which you'll learn about if you pursue these careers. These are our number one kind of funding categories for research and early career researchers, myself at the time. And we got funded to design software for Indigenous people. We called it This My Mob. It was about digital land rights. That's what the name of our project, our funding grant was about, reconnecting Indigenous people. And so it was really looking at how can technology help preserve Indigenous people's identity and languages and cultural aspects. And so to do that, we went and decided to go and do a co-design study across Australia with different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And we ended up co-designing a software called This My Mob. And it's still there. We actually repurposed it for Leslie's Aboriginal Medical Service that she heads up, the Southwest Aboriginal Medical Service in Bunbury, Western Australia, and that became because of COVID. So we repurposed the app. We repurposed that software and developed the first time a platform for Aboriginal medical services to use to connect with their patients and clients during telehealth times. And that was something that we did with that app. But you know, building that software, we've still got the software, so we can still do things with that software. And I even had an email today about that. But it's like, so when you do these things, it's like, well, yeah, well, you know, what are you going to do with it? What's the purpose? So I guess that's the main thing. I guess that was just me adding a bit more to your perspectives. But I think, what about the challenges? What are the challenges, and how do you overcome those challenges? Marissa?
I don't know, you work with the people who are of interest. So if it's a particular community group or a representative group, and you work together. But also what I love, which I think Tristan was talking about earlier, was that just sitting in the room and listening to all these like people speak their expertise, and you just, like, I just remember as a student, I used to sit there going, wow, man, how do they know that? That's amazing. And even now as working here, it's making connections and links to help with those challenges, because one of my biggest challenges was, it's all lovely and great to create a living archive for community, but how are you going to ensure that if it's digital, because that's what we're looking in the digital space, how you make sure that that is protected and safe and doesn't become a cyber threat. So these were just things that always went in the back of my head. But then when I came on campus and with Chris, and all these conversations happen, and then you start to learn from, what community have told you or your family have told you, and then you hear from the people who have those skills to solve those problems. And so you can come together, and that's like why I say I like research now. It's done well, but that's the thing. So they're challenges, but when you get all the people in the room and people are listened to, everyone's voice is respected in that space. That's how we can overcome some of the challenges, I think.
John?
I guess one of the things I say to my students is that if something is a challenge, then and when you're doing your PhD, it's actually, if something is surprising you, if something has happened that is different to what you're expecting, then that's really actually quite exciting to sort of dig into that. So I think research gives you the opportunity when there is a challenge to actually probe it a little bit and sort of try and work your way through it and around it and make sense of it, it's like. And so I think sometimes a challenge can actually be the thing that becomes your PhD, because it didn't work as you expected. So you're finding out something new. And I think, yes, we all have, a PhD, I think the comment that, it's never finished, and so it is, and it's not a Nobel Prize. It's like, so some of the advice that you get from your supervisors, and so it is about biting off a chunk of research to do that is small enough to digest, and you might not know that at the start, but you work through that with your supervisors. And so that the importance of having a good supervisory team around you, I think is really important. And I guess having been here at Monash and growing up through the processes that we now have with the milestone processes, I'm so proud of that, because I think it really does provide a supportive environment for our graduate research students, so that through that process, they're working with the right kind of supervisory team, that we're checking in to make sure that things are happening, their progress, they're not losing supervisors and sort of being stranded. So I think here at Monash, we can be quite proud of that sort of structure that's around the PhD. And probably when you are confronted, again, with that issue of, so many problems, how am I going to help to solve all these problems? I remember my supervisor said to me a very important words of wisdom. It's like, you've got to sort of work out how to play the game to change the game. So sort of work out, which battles that you're going to pick and which ones you're going to just leave for the moment, to sort of use the power of research to arm yourself to take them on at a later stage. It's like, so I think that's the thing to see that, yeah, the PhD, it's a big thing, but it's also a finite thing. And so to sort of have strategies to be able to work your way through that, yeah.
I think my supervisors are all getting counselling now from my experience. My PhD supervisor, he copped it all. He knew everything that was going on in my life. But one of the things my master's supervisor said when I would come, with all these questions, he'd say, Chris, don't think about it, just go and do it. And so that kind of became my motto, and that's what I did. So that got me through. But Leslie, what are your current FIT Monash student? So maybe you can share a couple of your challenges with us.
Thank you. Look, I think some of the challenges that I've had, both through my master's, I mean, I've always been a student that wanted to be on campus and embrace the campus life and being able to socialise and with study groups, but also to speak to those supervisors in a way where you're face to face. And when, because I'm in Western Australia, I do this from a distance. So being able to discipline myself between my work commitments as well, because I work full time, is a challenge for me. But I also know that never to be, I've learned to ensure that I participate in, with my supervisors, because it doesn't matter if you haven't moved very far or you've moved along quite a bit in the research. It's about an engagement, and whether, supervisors, not to be afraid to ensure that you stay committed and have those discussions and talk. And, it's challenging working from a distance, but there are other aspects of it that's rewarding as well. So I think the other challenges were when you have a number of supervisors, they all come from their different perspectives, and how do you write for those supervisors, or identifying what is the role of each of the supervisor to you. And that may be, you'll understand and be able to identify where the strengths that you can draw from each of those supervisors. And that's been, and not to feel that it's all personally attacked at you or anything like that. These are individuals who are experts in their fields, and they understand. They've done their PhDs. They've had many students who've come through them as well. So understanding where they're coming from and allowing some of that flexibility. I've sometimes been known to be like really technical, and people say, oh, you can't, if you're working and your employment, you can't write like you're writing a business case, or you're writing and I've got a journalism background, so this looks like a journalism article, and it's shifting your thought patterns in your head to come from that research perspective, and that's been the biggest challenge for me.
Thank you for that.
Can I pick up on what you were saying there, Leslie, about supervisors? Because I think that's really important. It's like the fact that, yes, I say to my students, you know, be nice to your supervisors, manage your supervisors. It's like, because unfortunately we have a lot of calls on our time, and I also say to them, but one of the things I would love to do more is to supervise. It's like, so please, you know, make sure that when we have our time together, that you get out of it what you need to get out of it. It's like, and so because I you know, they're the best things in my calendar are my catch-ups with my PhD students, because I get to talk about ideas. It's like, and get to sort of see how things are going and not going, and help to sort of troubleshoot and sort of guide and coach in the right kind of direction. It's like, so it is so important to, have a good relationship with your supervisors, know what each of them brings to the table, and you learn that, because at the beginning you're just finding out who they are. It's like, and at the end you sort of understand where they all fit, and that you do keep them informed about what's going on, so that they can help you work your way through the issues, the problems that you confront. And I guess one of the things I learned as a student was when my supervisor would say to me, how's it going? And I, at the start, assumed that it was like, how's the work going? Because that's what I came from, to really appreciating that she was asking me, how are you going? It's like, so that was one of the things that I learned through my PhDs, to remember that we're all people when we're working in places. And so always, again, put the person first.
Yeah, you have to balance life. I might open it up for some questions from the floor. If people want to engage and ask questions, you're welcome to. If you just put your hand up, we can give you a mic. Or if you speak loud enough, we can hear you. But it'd be good, so because Leslie's online, if we have a microphone. So I'm going to do that. So don't be frightened. Just, there you go. And just introduce your first name. And
mine's probably less of a question, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to introduce myself. My name's Ellen Batani, and I'm based in the Indigenous research team. And we're just moving under the Tristan's portfolio, so the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous. I wanted to introduce myself because we are offering an additional support to Indigenous HDR students at the university. It's great to see that there's a lot available within the faculty already, but that is a primary function of my role, is supporting Indigenous HDR students. So if I haven't been in touch already, you'll probably receive an email from me, Leslie. And one of the great things about my position is I'm actually 1 to 2 days a week, I'm based in the Monash Graduate Research Office, which is obviously the team that look after everything from applications, candidature, scholarships, etc. So I've got access to all of their systems and a direct contact to the people there, which has been really helpful so far already, and I think will continue to be really beneficial. But we're also looking to develop various networking and professional development opportunities over the year as well. So yeah, keep an eye out as the space grows. And yeah.
thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to go first? And I just wanted to say one of the things, because I too, like Leslie, was a distance student, so it was really, really hard. And one of the things, a couple of the aunties where I was living connected me with another PhD student at another uni, but we were both living in Albury together, and just that connection, because we were both PhD students doing it remotely, was awesome. And then we had a couple of writing retreats here on campus, and it was just the best thing to be with other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students who are going through what you're going through, and particularly from your uni, because you have similar experiences. And I know Tristan and them are doing more in that space now, but that was, for me, like, that was a key to me getting through. I had the most amazing supervisors and support, but also having the cohort of students just to, talk about. And even two of us, we didn't even know we were writing about the same stuff, and we were just like, Oh, that's what I just said. That's what I just said. You know, we were able to, even though they're in a different faculty, but we're writing about our methods and stuff. So just that type of on-campus support and yeah, it was good.
Hello, my name's Kaylee. I know we've been talking about the journeys and getting into PhDs, but I think the question of what's after the PhD, what's the end goal that students are going to be going into? What's the careers going to look like? What's the whole journey after the PhD?
Oh, goodness, it's like, yeah. I mean, I guess going into the PhD, it helps to have a little bit of an idea about, you know, why you're doing it and what you might be thinking about next, but also not to have too cemented an idea as well too. It's like, because I feel that the PhD can open up opportunities that you didn't know about. It's like, so if you are looking for a career in academia, then it certainly becomes the grounding for that in terms of again having the credentials, but also opening up those networks. And so the importance of looking at how you develop your research networks, take advantage of, again, the support that's given here in the Faculty of IT to be able to attend conferences and to find the people that you like and you want to consider working with. So there's that potential to get, if you're interested in an academic career, to get that little bit of education experience as well too, to open that up. But I think it's also going to industry with a PhD to actually be able to explain what your research skills are, what your strategy skills are, the way in which you can take a problem and really find out whether you need to know more about the problem before offering a solution or putting forward some creative solutions, particularly when it comes to digital technologies. So I think it does open up those kind of opportunities depending on where you go and what opportunities might be there as well too. It's like, I mean, again, the stories you're hearing is that, yeah, things happen and unfold, but because of what you've done in your PhD, you're in the right position to take advantage of them when they arrive, it's like. And so how to use it in that kind of way, yeah.
Leslie, what's your aspirations after you finish your PhD?
The opportunity to be able to, I suppose, enter the space in academia and have a career in academia, which I feel will give me, you know, that credentials to do that. So I've always been hesitant about going into academia because I didn't have a PhD. So for me, I've done a lot of industry work and reached levels where I was able to perform at an executive level, but I feel I'd like to, take that opportunity in academia next.
There you go. Well, that's great because we need more Indigenous academics at Monash and across all the universities. We're like unicorns walking around. There's not many of us, so we need more. I'm just mindful of time, but I guess just in the last few minutes, I guess, because I want to give people time, you know, chill, and there's more food there at the back, and ask questions maybe individually if you'd like. But I think, you know, for me, obviously I'm here, right? This is my career, reluctantly, but I'm here. You know, like I said, I came kicking and screaming, but I think it's also, you know, universities are full of life. They're full of young people. They're full of old people, but like me. But they're full of inspiration and encouragement. And you know, it's the uni life is just can be whatever you want to make it be. Especially, you know, when you're an undergrad, you're out there having fun and at the pub and at the sports gym or whatever. That was what I was doing. But and hanging out with my uni mates. And staying on campus is also part of that, and socialising. And so we have lots of clubs here as well, because you've got to have that time out. And you've got to, maybe be able to kind of have downtime. And so looking after your health and well-being is also a part of that. And we can get caught up in the writing. And obviously when you do that, it's always good to remind yourself, got to take a little break and go and have a life. But I think that, for us holding this event today was really about trying to engage and provoke Indigenous conversations around doing a master's or a PhD in technology. We are the only faculty of information technology at any university in Australia. You mentioned, Tristan mentioned some of our global campuses, or Guido as well. And, we have those global campuses, and there is an opportunity to also do some of that studies abroad. Universities encourage that. I went to Harvard University for a year and in the US and did part of my research there. And we have an alliance with the Warwick University in the UK, and we've been promoting, advocating for Indigenous HDR students to go and have an opportunity to do some of their studies there in the UK. But also we have I don't know, you wouldn't call it a campus, but it's a mini campus, I guess, in Prato in Italy. If that's any encouragement, I'd encourage you to think about that, because we do send students there. I know Tristan's taken some of the Indigenous students there since he's been here, and we take them to Malaysia as well. So there's all these other opportunities of why you should seriously think about what do you want to do this for, and there's all these other benefits to it. But and this is for all students, not just Indigenous students, but at the same time, obviously, hard work. and Joanne mentioned your supervisors. Working closely with your supervisor, you build a relationship with them. It's you get to know them, they get to know you. They probably know you better than what you know yourself, because they can see you coming and think, oh my, here they come. But yeah, you mentioned managing your supervisor. This is exactly what you've got to do. You do have to make sure you put time in their diaries to meet with them, and you make the commitment, and you have your outline of your questions that you want to ask, or where your updates are, and what you send them stuff to read so that they've got it ready waiting for you. And that's always good to be prepared and organised. But, it's uni life too, right? It's not always going to work out that way. I don't know if anybody has got anything else to say. I'm just conscious of time. I just want to say, Tristan, you want to have any last words? Thank you. I want to thank Leslie for making her time to join us. Leslie's also a grandmother, and also a mother, obviously, and a grandmother. So I know she's busy, and she cares for a couple of her grandkids. So thank you, Leslie, for that. We really appreciate your time and your commitment, and your leadership as well, particularly on your journey. And you will be, Narissa graduated from here. Kirsten Thorpe graduated from here. So you're not alone. You've got other strong Shannon Faulkner graduated from here. So you'll have you've got other strong Aboriginal women leaders and academics that you can reach out to, and we should put you in touch with people like that. And thank Narissa as well for being here, making the time to come. Really appreciate your contribution and your sharing of your experiences. And Joanne, thank you so much for being here and making time. Really appreciate everything that you've added to. And obviously, you know, Joanne's, you know, we asked Joanne to do this as well as with Guido because we wanted people to see a supervisor. This is what a supervisor looks like. I want to thank Tristan. I want to thank Guido and Amy as well. You know, for being here and for your talks. I want to thank Kaylee and Lucas. I forgot. Sorry, Caitlin. Yeah, Heather. Sorry, and Heather and Caitlin and all the other team, Emily and all that that's been involved for marketing and communication. Heather's just come back from leave, so we're still catching up. And I want to thank you all for coming here. And Erin, thank you for that. And Tom's also one of our academics here, so Tom Chandler. So we might just leave it there for now, and that way, you know, we can mingle for a little bit. And and we can, if you want any questions you want to ask, you know, individually, then you're welcome to. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. It was awesome. All the best.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.